sort of introduction to his works, and primarily four works: the Phenomenology of Spirit, or
Yeah.
mind, where you told us that the translation of the word Geist can be
Ah,
done as spirit or mind. And
ah,
then the Science of Logic. The third is Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences. And the fourth one was the Elements of the Philosophy of Right.
right.
And then we began with laying out uh, what has been done before Hegel and what is Hegel's intervention. So we
Hmm.
start talking about the Cartesian dualism and how, for Descartes, the split between the subject and the object was the fundamental distinction in philosophy. And
Right.
that is where we uh, look at how the distinction between the subject as cogito, the thinking substance, and the object as the object of study, and the object as nature,
Hmm.
is given out by Descartes. And then we look at Kant's intervention, where he talks about uh, cognition transcending this distinction.
Hmm.
And uh, and then we look at Hegel's intervention, who poses this question of, if cognition is transcendent to the subject and the object distinction, then whose faculty is it, and who is getting that knowledge? Because it
Right.
is transcendental to the individual mind and the object.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that is where you pointed out that what Hegel says is that the entity which obtains this knowledge is subject, the subject in capital, which is different from our subject of the Cartesian dualism, and
Right.
which is also called the absolute and the self consciousness,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
which is beyond this subject that we look in when we talk about the Cartesian subject and the object distinction. And uh, then you talked about the how Hegel introduces the idea of history into his, and how knowledge is how knowledge proceeds. That is a point that I couldn't understand, so I won't talk about that. But what you pointed out was that Hegel builds on Kant, but he also critiques Kant, and in that sense, he is building up his own philosophy, and uh, locating himself in this. Uh, I mean, this process of adding on to that is when you will talk about the notion of history. I couldn't get that. So uh, the next thing is the idea of phenomenology. We had a brief discussion about it. That phenomenology is a scientific study of phenomena, and it transcends the distinction of the subject and the object, the distinction of the knower and the known. And that is also when you talked about the idea of the consciousness, which Pratiksha had asked about in the last class, where you said that consciousness is where we have no distinction between the knower and the known, and the distinction is bracketed, to use a modern term.
Right.
And then we were to begin with the dialectic, which we haven't done yet. So that is where we stopped.
Correct. Very good. Any questions about other questions apart from the biggest question about history, right?
Yes,
That I will explain what it means.
I had one more question, sir. Uh, you pointed out that that Hegel talks about this reaching this point of knowledge where the subject is grasped as substance.
Right.
So when you say that, what I am asking is that, is Hegel saying that when the subject is grasped as object, uh, is it what he's saying? Like, is substance equal to object, or is it different? Like, are we using substance in the Aristotelian sense, or what is meant
Yes,
by this?
yes, 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 yes. Substance in Aristotelian sense. Substance
Okay.
as primary and secondary, remember?
Yes, yes.
Right. So
All right.
that is, and subject, both are in some way transcended over here, right? In the idea of subject with capital S, or the absolute, or self, right? So self, universal self consciousness is Hegel's. What is he? That is what he postulates. And the question of history that you were asking is, if you look at it, the history of philosophy, then it is in 16th century that Descartes makes idea of thinking substance in some sense absolute, by which we mean that it does not depend on tradition and knowledge, traditional knowledge. It does not depend on traditional authorities, right? And René Descartes, if you remember, very famously talks about skepticism, right? What is the evidence that I exist, or you exist? What is the proof? He questions everything. What is the proof that this world exists, this thing exists, your screen exists, your phone exists, and so on and so forth? And what is the proof that I exist? And the proof that he provides is that there is a question. Who is asking this question? So question requires a questioner, right? I hope you get what I'm saying. When you say, what is the proof that I exist, there is this question which I ask, what is the proof? But if there is a question, there must be a questioner. You get what I am saying? So by implication, I exist because I think, right? I think, therefore I am. So subject or thinking self, thinking substance, cogito or mind, is the producer of knowledge, truth, not authorities, right? That is what, according to Descartes, is theory of knowledge, philosophy of knowledge. And it is a rationalist philosophy, if you remember. And then we had empiricists who say that we get knowledge from observation and from sensory experiences, right? Locke and Hume. Kant intervenes in this debate and postulates that the faculty of cognition is transcendental, right? Rationality is transcendental. That means it goes beyond thinking mind and it goes beyond nature. It is common to both thinking world and thinking mind and nature. And that is why products of human mind, like the scientific knowledge that we were talking about, like E is equal to mc square, and the world, there is complete agreement between products of human mind and the world, because there is something which is transcendent to them. That is what Kant says. We are just revising Kant. And then Hegel talks about this absolute self-consciousness, which because if there is faculty of cognition transcends subject and substance, then there should be a higher level of subject, right? There is a higher unity of subject. And this happens in early 19th century. So knowledge of self has grown from Descartes to Hegel. And that is what we mean by history. 16वीं सदी, 16th century से लेकर 19th century. Do you get what I'm saying now? The knowledge of self is an end product of a historical period. Right? You get what I'm saying? ये जो हिस्ट्री मैंने कही, 16th century Descartes, 18th century Kant, 19th century Hegel, right? So knowledge of absolute self is at the end of 3 centuries of thinking, right? That means it's historical. Is that much clear? Temporal.
Yes, sir. So when you say
19.
So when you say that it is temporal, then what Hegel is trying to say is that it can grow. I mean, when you go to 20th century, like, is he saying that when he's
That is one of the biggest issues that we have to think for ourselves.
okay?
Maybe he does, maybe he does not, or he considers his own period as the final stage.
Oh, all
That's what he
right.
thinks. So all the ultimate knowledge is got by Hegel. The knowledge,
Okay.
knowledge, uh, it's the pinnacle. But some people think that it's not so. It's a kind of historical process. So knowledge is historical. Knowledge, self-knowledge is historical, and this is how he introduces what is known as historicism, and Hegel becomes one of the most important philosophers of historicism, right? And we were all discussing isms. So what do you mean by historicism? Can you tell me? It is historicism. Like romanticism, classicism, historicism. So can anyone tell me what is historicism? Yes. Yes, everything can be understood in historical context, or Asma, I will modify only in its historical context. Anything can be understood only in its historical context, right? There is a difference here. Everything can be understood in historical context. Anything can be understood only in its historical context. You cannot understand anything outside of its historical context. That is what historicism means, right, Asma? Okay. So, what does it even mean? It means that history has a kind of end, uh, end goal. History has an end goal, and this idea is teleology of history. So, telos of history. History has telos, and by that is the ultimate purpose, end. Which means history has its own laws, right? There are laws of history, and what are those laws of history is what we will see, right? Any questions about this idea that history has telos? And you know, telos or purposiveness is again an idea in Kant, if you remember. So history also has this own purpose, its own, and it also means that history has its own laws. That is what we mean by historicism. Okay, so let's now look at laws of history, right? So laws of history and laws of ultimate self consciousness, and the laws of this is what he is trying to say, that laws of history, laws of self consciousness, and laws of logic, right, are the same. There, so history, self consciousness, and logic are governed by the same laws, right? That is his idea, and this is what it means. If you look at this, it will be, you will understand what it means. That history of philosophy ended with the idea of absolute in Hegel, but idea of subject of knowledge began with Descartes in 16. So in 300 years, 250 years, you have idea of self emerging at the end of the process of 250 years or so. So it's a kind of 200-year-old. Okay. So it's a 200 years almost of historical process that has resulted in this kind of knowledge of absolute or the ultimate self. Right? Any difficulty in understanding this? It's not an easy idea to understand, I know. Right? The knowledge of absolute, right, is an end product of 200 years of history, starting with Descartes. So laws of history, laws of self-consciousness, and laws of logic as well are the same. Amira, can you hear me properly? Can others hear me properly? Or is my voice breaking?
Yes, sir, it's clear now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. And what are those laws? Right? There must be some laws. So if you again look here, then what Descartes says is the true source or the absolute source of human knowledge is mind or thinking self, right? To which empiricists say that the ultimate source of knowledge is senses, not mind. Right? And Kant then says that ultimate source of knowledge is faculty of cognition or rationality. Right? Any doubt about this? Any questions so far with me in this conversation? So what empiricists have done is that they have negated rationalists, right? They say that sense and not mind is the absolute source of knowledge, right? So in that sense, they have negated rationalists, and Kant provides a synthesis of by saying that faculty of cognition is transcendental. So here is a position, or you can say this is the thesis. Rationalist is thesis. This is its antithesis, and this is its synthesis. You can say that these are the terms used to describe the history of 200 years of thought philosophy. So if you look at history of philosophy, then there is a thesis advanced by rationalists which says mind is the source, ultimate source of knowledge. Thinking systematically, logically is the ultimate source of knowledge. Empiricists like Locke and Hume would reject the idea, right? They critique it, reject it, and this is negation, right, of thesis. It is antithesis, and then antithesis is negated by Kant. There is a negation of negation that has happened in synthesis, right? So this is the law of philosophy. So philosophy seems to move in three movements. Philosophical knowledge, right, or knowledge of absolute is historical, right, and it moves through negation. So negation or rejection of the thesis and rejection of antithesis is very important to the progress of knowledge, right? So basically he is saying negation is not a bad thing, but negation is the way through which knowledge progresses. Negation is the process through which knowledge progresses, right? So there are two ideas here which are common to laws of history, laws of self-consciousness, and laws of logic. And those, one of the laws is the law of negation and progress. So far with me, any doubts?
No, sir.
So the laws of the process of negation and which results in progress is called the dialectic. Right? So what is dialectic? Dialectic is the process through which thesis is negated, and that negation is negated in synthesis. Right? So that is the process of dialectic. Let's look at how this applies to self-consciousness. So when you were born as an individual, when you were born, repeat what Kant said about knowledge. Okay, what Kant said was that the ultimate source, the source of knowledge is the faculty of transcendental faculty of reason. That is what he said, which is beyond subject and object. Jaldi. Right? And thus he synthesized the rationalist and the empiricist. Rationalist says that only mind is the source of knowledge. Empiricist says the only sense is the source of knowledge. And he says that faculty of knowing is beyond both senses and mind. It is transcendent. And that's why you get knowledge like sum of all angles of a triangle is 180 degrees. And that is the transcendental source of knowledge. Synthetic a priori. Okay, what I said about dialectic. So dialectic is this process, right? For example, this is rationalist position. This is empiricist position, and this is almost synthesis of that. So empiricist negate rationalist, and Kant negates this negation, right? And that is what is meant by dialectic. We'll discuss it at some length. I will give you more examples, Mansi, and that's what I'm planning to do. So when you were born, you had your sense of self, your knowledge of self
Excuse me.
immediate. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
All right. So would you please also repeat what was told about the laws of history, laws of self-consciousness, and the laws of logic?
That all the threes are same. They are dialectical.
So
that's what I.
So by that we mean that they follow the same process.
Exactly.
And the laws are different.
The same mechanism guides laws of history. Our history is guided by the same laws. Philosophy is also guided by the same laws. Phenomenology is also guided by the same laws, and the logic is also guided by the same laws. And that those same laws are called the dialectic, right? So it's dialectic, and I'm explaining what that is, right? And how it underlies also. I'm explaining what I have said here. So hold on to it, right?
Okay.
So when you were born, your knowledge of self was immediate, right? And simple. It's kind of simple being that you had, right? You did not identify yourself as Jaladi or as Digvijay or as Sachin or as whoever, Mansi. Yourself was kind of immediate sensory. Your world was that of sensory data only, right? There was only consciousness, right? you did not exist. There was only consciousness. Then you started defining yourself as not other. That's the second phase of your life, where you started identifying yourself as not your mother, that you are not this wall, right? Who you are is not this. So who you are is not your father. Who you are is not your mother. Who you are is not this bed. Who you are is not this world, right? So you are defining yourself, your essence was in being not other. That's the second stage. The third stage is speculative, right? It's not something that your personality came from your essence, and that essence is what? Not other. Who you are is not. What is masculinity? Masculinity is everything that is not femininity. What is white? Then white is not what is black. It's binaristic phase, right? In which we are living, right? That's so. Who do you know who you are? Is you define yourself as not other, right? Your essence is negation of the other. And the third, when you realize, right, this, that who you are is something which is beyond your essence and the essence of the other. Now, this is a complicated thing. So you as absolute is the third phase, of which is beyond that. And to give an example would be, you are not your mother, right? But your mother is also not you. So your mother's essence is not being you, and your essence is not being your mother. And then there is some common ground. And what is that ground? Both of you are human, right? So being human is the third stage of realization, where your mother's motherness and yourness is not destroyed, but they are transcended into a higher level of mediated unity, as it's called, right? There is a unity which is not simple but mediated. Another example, say for example, you define, when you go to Tamil Nadu, you realize that you are Gujarati, or you are Malayali, or you are Hindi speaking, or you are Punjabi, or you are Bengali, right? You realize who you are when you are exposed to not you. Am I making some sense here, or is it going above your head? You become who you are in the presence of the other. Am I making some sense? Making sense.
Yes.
You become
Yes.
an Indian when you are, say for example in China, तब आपकी इंडियननेस के बारे में आप कॉन्शियस होते हो, राइट? आप गुजरातीनेस के बारे में तब कॉन्शियस होते हो जब आप गुजरात के बाहर हो या आप किसी नॉन गुजराती के साथ हो, right? Only so your essence as an Indian is there when you are in presence of the other. Hold on. Right? So, for example, you go to China and then you realize you are an Indian, right? So your recognition of yourself as an Indian is dependent on your being in presence of the other, in negating the other, right? You define yourself as not Chinese. But then you realize at a higher stage that both of you are Asians. So Asian is a higher level where Indian as well as Chinese are unified in a higher unity, right? This is the higher unity. Where you realize that you are Asians. Yes. Why? Why does that happen, Jay? Is because you define you are students in presence of non-students. That is your teacher. And teachers are teachers in presence of students. I hope you get what I'm saying. So recognition of our identity is dependent on the other. It is contingent on the presence of the other. Contingent is dependent, right? So you being masculine is dependent on the other. That is non-masculine. In the presence of non-masculine, you recognize your masculinity. In the presence of masculinity, you realize your femininity. So knowledge of non-masculine is needed to have knowledge of masculine. Am I making some sense? So you become students only in present of, say for example, teachers or administrative staff, the others. In front of your parents, you are their children, right? But in with your friends, you are something else. You with your teachers, you are students. So your identity is dependent on negation of the other. It is dependent on your knowledge of the other. So knowledge of yourself is dependent of your knowledge of the other. And that applies both the ways. No, but say for example, Jaldi, plastic chair and you also have something in common, right? Say for example, material existence. Matter. आप भी matter से बने हो और कुर्सी भी matter से बनी हुई है.
Sir, so what is the point of this? Then it can be said that we all belong to Earth. So we're all, not that different from each other. So what is the conclusion of this law?
What is no conclusion? That is how it moves. That is the mechanism where, and we will go into detail about what it is, right? So continuing the example of presence and knowledge of non-masculine has to be there in order for you to be masculine. Knowledge of non-feminine and the presence on non-feminine is required and dependent on you to be feminine. Your femininity is dependent on the presence and your knowledge of non-femininity. Right? Clear? That is what it means. That is, and this is dialectic at your level of selfhood. Right? So at the level of philosophy, you see that rationalist is the first statement where he says thinking substance is the source of knowledge. Empiricists say that it's the senses, not mind. They are negating rationalists. And Kant is saying that faculty of cognition is synthesis beyond both. Right? Hold on, Jay. हम जाएंगे द्वैत और अद्वैत में भी जाएंगे. Don't worry. So, confrontation with others that one recognizes self exactly. Exactly, Digvijay. Smith, you had a question. What is difference between second and third understanding? Second and third understanding is that you recognize yourself as not the other, right? And the third, you realize that you are the same as the other at a higher level. आप दोनों इंसान हो, Chinese और आप, right? So that is a higher level of understanding. So Tamil and Gujarati are unified at a higher level called Indian, right? Indian is then defined by not Indian, that is Chinese. But Chinese and Indian are again unified under Asian, right? Then Asian and American, Asian to be Asian has to know American. But then it can be unified at a higher level of being human. And human and non-human are self and the other, which can be unified at higher level of being. That is what he means, right? So let us now look at the good old Aristotelian logic. Aristotle says that A cannot be. A cannot be not A. Right. A cannot be not A. That is what Aristotle says. It's not possible. The Aristotelian laws of logic, if you remember last semester, then he says that A and not A cannot be the same. The laws of three laws of logic, excluded middle, law of identity, law of difference, right? So A cannot be not A, right? A cannot be considered as equal to B. That is, this is not possible, right? A is equal to B हो नहीं सकता. But say for example, if I write B, right? Those who know a bit of mathematics, as not A. A cannot be equal to not A, right? Basically, ऐसे वो कह रहा है. Which is the same as A being not equal to B. वो एक ही है. This is what he is saying. This is Aristotelian logic. Remember that? Does anyone remember Aristotle's laws of logic, 5th semester? Yeah. So what he is saying that this is possible. He is saying that A is equal to not A is possible. How? How is that possible? Is, say for example, your father is not your father. He is also his father's son. He is also a chess player. He is also somebody's brother. I hope you get that. So there are far more possibilities. So your father is not your father is logically possible because he's also somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody chess player, a businessman, or an employee of an organization, right? It is possible. That is what he is saying, and that is because Because your identity is always dependent on knowledge of the other. That's what he's saying. Right? So he's critiquing Aristotelian logic and opening up, pointing out that identity is not a positive thing living here. Right? It's not a positive quality. Identity is a negative quality. Right? At the level of logic. Yes. Right? That is also what he is doing. He is pointing out that identity is a function of negation, as well as knowledge of non-identity. So there has to be feminine for masculine to exist. There has to be masculine for feminine to exist. Yes, exactly. It is so restrictive. Jaldi. Identity in Aristotelian logic is extremely restrictive. जो हमारे साथ नहीं है वो हमारे दुश्मन है, राइट? जो हमारे दोस्त नहीं है हमारे दुश्मन है, बट अरे भाई नहीं, दुश्मन नहीं भी हो सकते. So Aristotelian logic is also critiqued in dialectical notion of logic, right? Yes, now you remember that. But the underlying process is this. And not just that, if you look at this, right? Let's take this in a make more mathematical manner. Okay. Yeah, A is equal to not A, right? Is what it is. Then those who studied bit of math, exactly, night and day. Those who know bit of math, right, can say that A और ये A दोनों common है यहाँ पे, right? And would say this is the higher level of, you see the capital here, right? This is the third step of the logic. Yes. ये एक्टिव पैसिव न्यूट्रल मुझे पता नहीं चला, जय.
So, as we discussed in Neoplatonism, that there are three forces: the God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Okay, great.
So
you can
so
see
in Gurdjieff system, there is active, passive, and neutral force.
So there is some influence of Neoplatonicism as well.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Good. Very good observation. So, and why does that happen is because he is drawing upon traditions of idealism in Western philosophy. Okay. So now let's look at the problems. Day and night, you are right. The problems begin here. The second stage. Some people call it people define it as antithesis stage, right? And he did not use thesis, antithesis, synthesis as a formula. That is something that how other people describe uh, uh, Hegel, right? Let's look at this. The problem is that this stage is the stage of conflict. You require, right, in order to be masculine, you require the other to be masculine. In order to be feminine, you require the other. Your being masculine is contingent, dependent on the presence and the knowledge of the other, right? So otherness is something that human consciousness does not like. Human consciousness, according to Hegel, is desire. Capital D. Human consciousness depends on other, but at the same time does not want other to be other. It wants to turn other into the same. That is what human desire wants. Desire wants everything to be made into its own self. That's the requirement for property, right? Very often, if you can understand, you want a mere property. I want other things to be mine. This material domain to belong to me. Which laws? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis?
Yes, I didn't quite catch what we were discussing after Aristotelian logic. I mean, we did say that A is not equal to A.
But A can be equal to A, and that is the higher level of unity.
The third level.
Right. That's why I've used capital A here.
Yes. So he skips the second step, sort of.
Yeah, but if you see, this is how he defines it. यहाँ पे ये possible. Aristotle says A is equal to not A is not possible. Hegel says this is how it is. A is always not A. A is not A. That means it has to have presence of what should I say? Night. It depends on the night.
Yeah, but then we can't put the is equal to sign between that, right?
Okay, wait. Yeah, this is what.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yes.
Okay. So yes. A is not equal to not.
A. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So male is equal to not non-male. Yes, right. And then you can see that in maths, ये minus और minus cancel हो जाते हैं.
हाँ जी, yes. Yes, that would make sense.
हो जाता है ये.
Yes.
Right. और ये जो A is equal to A है ना, वो
universal, the third absolute.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, now I got it.
Thanks for drawing this attention. Otherwise, it would have slipped my mind.
Yeah, I just couldn't catch. I don't know. So
right.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. So maybe this is how it starts. This is the Hegelian syllogism, if you want that term, right? A is equal to A. This is the first step. This is the second step. This is dialectic, right? Is this clear? Dialectic. And he says human history also obeys these laws. So, kaise? The first is feudalism, right? Or sovereignty. And that which gives feudalism was negated in monarchy. And monarchy resulted in the rise of parliamentary democracy. It's something like that, right? Or the bourgeois or the bourgeoisie. That feudalism में से capitalism आता है. और इसमें से पार्लियामेंट्री डेमोक्रेसी आती है अकॉर्डिंग टू I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused over here. This is pre-feudal economy. This is feudalism. And this is capitalism. This is how he would read history. Pre-feudal economy was product of negation by feudalism, and feudalism was negated by capitalism. Right? That is how he would look at history. Which means this is how dialectic is what our underlying logic of both history, self-consciousness and logic, right? And negation as leading to progress, or you can say negation to contradiction. In philosophy, you have this, right? In your own self-consciousness, this. In logic, this, and this is history. Now you can see how laws of history, laws of consciousness, laws of logic are governed by the same laws, that is dialectic. Any questions about this? Any doubts? If you have not understood, please ask me. So far,
Sir, I have one doubt.
Yeah, please go ahead.
The last thing that you talked about when you were giving, telling us about the laws of history and this idea of contradiction. Like I can see your screen, and you have pointed out that A is equal to A is pre-feudal, and then
this is analogous, right? I'm not saying A is equal to pre-feudal. I'm saying that laws underlying logic, laws underlying history, laws underlying self-consciousness are the same, and it is the law called dialectic, which is based on negation and progress. That's what I'm saying.
But the
analogous.
Yes.
What's the question?
So you have pre-feudal feudal time, and then the negation is the feudalism, and besides A is equal to A, which was our third stage, where you were talking about the universal, you have analogously pointed out capitalism. You know, which so our A is equal to
he
A
doesn't
was
use word capitalism, but private property.
Yes.
वो space ले लेता है, इसलिए मैंने. Okay, yeah. So what's the question?
So yes, sir. So when you are saying that this synthesis of pre-feudal and feudalism like is capitalism. How is it a category that is, what should I say, a category that is uh, of a higher understanding? Like if you're getting a,
It is a product of contradictions within feudalism,
yes,
right? And I'm not very sure about the economics of it. I will have to look up. But that is what he says. Historical history also moves in a linear manner. So
okay,
you can see that there is linearity as, right?
yes.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, I get my what I'm trying to ask.
Feudalism is a progressive, more progressive form from feudal, pre-feudal human being, nomadic, pastoral, nomadic, hunter-gatherer economy से ये advanced है, और इससे ये advanced है. But they were produced by internal contradictions and negations, according to Hegel.
Yes. Uh, but when you gave us the example of, the father and the son, and let me just give an example to show that. See, when we were trying to equate, A is equal to A. Uh, okay, no. See, what I'm trying to say, when we are trying to equate the son and the father, see, for example, as a chess player. So in that identity, both of them are equal. So uh, is it a valid, example of Hegelian logic?
Yeah, it is. Why?
Yes.
Because one person does not have a simple single identity. It is always contingent to something else,
Yes.
right? As a very good question. So your father is your father in presence of you, but in
Yes.
presence of his father, he is the son, right? So his identity is contingent, not absolute. Nobody can be absolutely father or male or female, or
Okay.
good or bad, or
All
anything
right.
dark, or whatever.
Yes, sir.
So it is a
I'm confused
contingent.
about my. Yes, sir. Like I'm pretty confused about my question on the feudal and capitalism thing. So I'll
That
think
is
about it and ask
because
you.
even I have not studied his economics.
Okay.
I will give you an example of how difficult it is to read Hegel in the next class. इसी में है. We will
All right.
discuss one paragraph from Hegel and try to figure out, after all this discussion,
All right,
what
sir.
he's trying to say. Right.
Yeah.
So I have not read his views on that, but I will clarify that for you.
All
So
right,
hold
sir.
on.
Yeah.
Right. Any other question? So contradiction, negation is the law, and it's progress. So I will make one more point and we will stop for today, because I think it's getting too much.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir,
Go
he
ahead.
is not. Explained us that how the second stage can lead to the third stage.
Through negations. ये देखो ना, ये और ये कैंसिल होता है ना, मैथ्स थोड़े बहुत जानते हो वो बताएंगे. ये नेगेटिव थर्ड कैसे होता है, जैसे मैंने कहा वो स्पेक्युलेटिव है. फॉर एग्जांपल यू एंड Gujarati and Tamil, higher level is Indian. Do you get what I'm saying? Oh,
Yes,
that
sir.
is the third stage. And the term that he uses is called sublation. Sublation is the term he uses to describe this, right? Sublation yani kya? This and this does not cease to be what it is. That is, a Gujarati and a Tamilian do not cease to be Gujarati and Tamilian, but they have a higher form of identity called Indian,
Yes.
right? And Indian and Chinese don't lose Indianness and Chinese when they are united in the third higher mediated unity, as he calls. From mediation hota hai.
Human. So we can
Asians, for
draw
example.
parallel line like y-axis and x-axis.
Nahi. How? I don't know.
If you want to connect the logic with a logic or a law of history with the dialectic laws, then we can draw parallel lines.
I didn't get point that you're trying to make.
So it meets at a particular point of time and place. So, I mean that if the first law of dialectic method is connected with the pre-feudal law, then it can be connected by x-axis and the y-axis.
No,
So
I am unable
somewhere,
to get. I cannot understand how you can bring in x-axis and y-axis over here somehow. What you are
there
trying
is a
to connect?
there is a workforce and a life force, right?
But kaise? What is the pole? What is on x-axis?
On x-axis there is time or law of history, and on y-axis there is the dialectic laws.
Okay.
So
So
they are connected at a particular place, but like they don't meet at a particular place, but due to our identification they meet at a particular place. Like
I
we are
get what
different, we
you are
are
trying
not.
to say, but they don't like this. They don't go unconnected, right? For example, शुरुआत में if you're trying to say first point is where this is the first point अंदर वाला, right?
Yes.
But they bifurcate. But in Hegel, they meet on a higher unity, right?
Okay.
So it's like parabola rather than x-axis and y-axis. There is a higher unity where they are. Yes, so A is Gujarati and not A is Tamil. Then on higher, both are the same on higher unity like Indian, Mansi.
So parabola is more efficient for this.
I, I think you should not get carried away by these graphs. You should leave those graphs beside. Otherwise, you will end up getting more confused. This is something
Yes,
that
so
you have
because he's
adding.
trying to equate this to
It may lead you somewhere where you will end up more confusing. So give up this idea of graph.
Yes.
Right? Geometrical designs छोड़ दो अभी. प्लेटो के घर में छोड़ दो. Right? Yeah, Mansi. Yes. Is it clear? Higher unity is Indian, but Indian and Chinese are again A and minus A, which are higher unity is Asian. Asian and American is again A and minus A. Again, bigger capital A is human beings. Human beings and Martians are again A and minus A. तो उसके ऊपर higher form में भी life form.
Sir,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I'm repeating my question here, but I still am not. I'm still a little confused, a little dazed, if you will, in this whole light of the conversation. That
Mind boggling है ना थोड़ा.
हाँ, like ये मुझे समझ में आ गया that this is a dialectical process and this is how laws are formed and this is how things happen in reaction to each other.
That is what Hegel's theory is.
Yes, yes. Then what is
मैं कोई चीज explain कर रहा हूँ मैं Hegel के ideas बता रहा हूँ मैं अपने
हाँ जी.
idea नहीं बता.
Yes.
I am explaining what Hegel is saying. Yeah.
But then, sir, what is like? Okay, fine. I get it that the Chinese and the Indian are both Asians, and they both belong to this one category. What is it after
Then
this?
वो Asian की जो category है is recognizable only in the presence of non-Asians, Europeans.
तो हम फिर से वहीं पे शुरू हो गए. Like it's a
हाँ.
cycle.
हाँ, वो spiral जैसा है.
And
So
it does not end.
You are talking about the right problem. That is not something that is clear in Hegel, or I have not studied Hegel at length, and I have not found answers on people who have written on Hegel on this problem that you are raising. What Hegel seems to be saying that this spiral ends with his uske period mein. But it seems to be an open kind of spiral.
Exactly,
right?
because this goes on now until
unended.
yes.
So that is a so if you are confused, then there is confusion here. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's confused. It is a confusing point in Hegel, and Hegel is one of the most difficult philosophers to read ever. Right. Okay. But these are good questions. Any more questions? What do I do with knowledge after higher unity? You seek even more higher unity. Vijay, same question as Jaldi. Ultimate purpose is absolute, realization of absolute.
उसके बाद क्या सर? We realize that.
इसके बाद कुछ नहीं होता, उसे ही absolute है. Definition.
Exactly. So this is something that cannot really be experienced.
Yes. Or according to, and
he's
trying to argue that this is something that is experienced.
Sir, explain, please.
That is what he is trying to argue. और जब ये एब्सोल्यूट नहीं होता तब क्या प्रॉब्लम्स होते हैं वो भी बताएंगे. And it's going to get bloodier as we go ahead, right? This is now confusing, then it will get bloodier.
Yes, sir.
In the next, because we don't have time for that.
Sir?
Yeah.
Could you once again explain how is he proving Aristotle's logic incorrect?
Because Aristotle say A cannot be equal to non-A. Right? जैसे कि male cannot be equal to female. But what he is saying that all identities, male, female, or whatever, Chinese, Tamil, are not absolute identities. They are contingent and they are based on negation of the other. Right? So your father is not your father is logically correct because your father is also somebody's son. Identity of your father is not dependent only on relation with you. It's also dependent on many other relations. Right? He's also somebody's brother. He's also a chess player. He's also an employee, or he's a businessman, or whatever, or somebody's husband. Jaldi, he says we have achieved it. Hegel claims so.
And that's what he says? That's it?
And when we don't do that, there are problems. What are those problems? We will discuss them when things get bloodier in the next.
Psychological, probably.
एक problem तो religion होता है. He calls it unhappy consciousness.
Okay.
Which is at the heart of religion. And that's why he got into trouble with religion. Okay. Non-identify, I think second law is talking about that. Yeah. Relation to absolute is telos of history, right? Logic and self-consciousness. Yes, Digvijay, you are right. We will discuss more of Hegel and then we will read. Right? इसीलिए classroom discussions are very important. ये सब चीजें आपने पढ़ने बैठोगे ना, it's going to be extremely tough. So those people who think आखिरी दिन में पढ़ लेंगे exam के are in trouble. But thankfully we have recordings, but then recordings is not live. So immediately if you have difficulty, you can't ask me when you are listening to recordings, right? So in asynchronous online learning में ये facility नहीं है, जो synchronous learning में है हमारे, live synchronous learning में, online learning. Okay, so should we stop for now because you have a other class? Yes. Okay, so thank you and have a nice day. And I'm sure though this is very tough to understand, it's very interesting, but more interesting, it is more important because a lot of Western literary and cultural thought depends on, has drawn upon Hegel especially Marxists and even post-Marxists, even Zizek, contemporary thinkers like Zizek talk about Hegel all the time, right? So Hegel is very important to understand the later development of Western philosophy and thought, right? So, okay, thank you and have a good day.